Hi, everybody. Welcome. It's really great to have you all here with us tonight. My name is Dave Reckess, and I have the honor of serving as Executive Director of 3GNY, also the grandson of four Holocaust survivors from Poland and Russia. And it's nice to see many familiar names in the attendance list here, as well as some folks who are new to 3GNY. 3GNY is an educational nonprofit for grandchildren of Holocaust survivors and supporters. As a living link, we preserve the legacies and lessons of the Holocaust. Our mission is to educate diverse communities about the perils of intolerance and to provide a supportive forum for the descendants of survivors. We empower 3Gs to share their stories. 3GNY's flagship educational initiative, WEDU, which is short for We Educate, empowers grandchildren of survivors to compellingly share their family's Holocaust experiences in school classrooms and with community groups. Through our grandparents' stories, we provide a human face to the past and a living link to the present, inspiring our listeners to stand up to hatred and to act with courage and compassion, something the world desperately needs today. Since 2005, 3GNY has trained more than 500 speakers in New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia, and around the country, and we've shared our stories in more than 1,500 classrooms and impacted more than 60,000 students and community members. Through this, we know that hope is not lost and that we need to keep doing this work now more than ever. You can help us accomplish this through a financial gift. This goes directly towards engaging more speakers and schools, thus reaching even more students with these impactful stories. We don't solicit teachers or schools. We make our programming completely free in order to remove any barriers from connecting students to the moving personal testimony from the Holocaust. Similarly, we provide our community programs like tonight's to help us all find meaning and connection through our shared history and identity. We are grateful for your donations to support our work and programs like this one. I will put a link in the chat in a little while with ways to donate, and we hope that you'll consider making a gift. If you've contributed before, thank you so much. It is because of donors like you that we can educate students and the community about the lessons of the Holocaust through our family's stories. Now, I'm very pleased to introduce our featured speaker for tonight's program. I have known Julie Brill for almost my entire tenure with 3GNY. Julie joined our WEDU speaker program soon after I did, and I've had the pleasure of getting to know her and her family story over the past 4 years. Julie is an active speaker in our WEDU program and continues to support new speakers as they craft their own stories through what is now the Living Links speaker training. I've heard Julie present in classrooms, read essays that she's had published as she has been working on this book, and we've had many great conversations about the purpose of memory, the responsibilities we have as descendants of survivors, raising children, and more. I'm deeply honored to consider Julie a good friend. I'm also really excited about Julie's book, Hidden in Plain Sight, a family memoir and the untold story of the Holocaust in Serbia. This moving book was released in stores last week, and I can tell you honestly, it is a beautiful and moving and important read. Weaving together memoir, historical research, travelogue, philosophical questions about family, memory, responsibility, and accountability, Julie's writing is thought-provoking, revelatory, and deeply personal. So without any further ado, I am really excited for this conversation with my friend Julie.
Thank you so much,
Um,
Dave. I've been like so
Absolutely.
excited about this. It feels like, I don't know, coming home, like the home team advantage or whatever. It feels very comfortable.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
yeah.
And I've been hearing about this process of writing a book for a long time, and seeing little bits of it coming out in essays and knowing that you've been working through the editing process. And so I'm going to start our conversation tonight. And first, just a note to everyone in the audience, if you have questions at any point tonight, feel free to put them in the chat or in the QA feature in your Zoom. But first, Julie, I just want to say a big Mazal Tov. I know this is a long time coming and a really, really big week and month for you. And how does it feel to finally be at this stage in the process?
It feels all the ways. The book launched on Yom HaShoah, so that's always kind of a confusing, conflicting day. And then I also had this book. So all the things, but I'm trying to pay attention as it all goes by. I will not be writing another book. So just like really noticing where we are and what's happening. And people have been so kind and responsive and interested. It's really been so far so good.
Good, good. I hope you do take the time to, as you said, to step back and realize that this is a big deal, and you're getting some great press for the book, and doing all the speaking tour and visiting with different synagogues and literary groups, and I'm glad that you are because it's important that more people have a chance to read the book and learn the story.
Thank you. Yeah, I wrote it because this book hasn't existed before. There hasn't been a book about the Jews of Serbia, and so that was really the goal, was to like round out the offerings of literature. I remember being in the Holocaust Museum bookshop in DC, and there were no books under Y for Yugoslavia, and that was sort of like a moment when there really should be one, and now there will be.
Yeah. And so how long ago did the seed for this book begin? When was that
Yeah, so
initially?
the flip answer is always. I've been collecting these stories and asking these questions always. But 2017 is when my younger daughter went to college and I really sat down and started to write.
17. So that you're making me do math. 8 years?
8 years. Yeah, it's a long time. A
Wow.
lot has happened in the last 8 years. There was a
Yeah.
pandemic, some things happened.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, just a couple changes in the world.
Yeah.
And I imagine that the broad motivation of wanting to tell the story of the Holocaust in Serbia or in the former Yugoslavia is a main motivation. Are there other things that have been driving you throughout this process and keeping you going? What's been the main motivating forces for getting this across the finish line?
Yeah, I mean, early feedback from the articles you mentioned where people were interested has been really helpful. I even found some people who have similar stories from Serbia who were probably
Oh,
all
really?
related. The way the with the intermarriage and everything, it's probably cousins, but that's been really wonderful. Just this ongoing ability to get more information and hand it up to my dad and just share it with my family has been really great. Um, yeah.
Yeah, and you mentioned your dad, and I have a feeling we're going to end up talking quite a bit about him. And
He's
so
here tonight, so he's listening.
he is
Yeah.
like in the room with you or in the Zoom
No,
somewhere else?
we're not in the same physical space, but he's in the
Okay.
Zoom.
Oh, great. Oh, the pressure is on.
Right?
Uh, so before we even dive into getting to know your dad through your stories, I'd love to be able to give our audience a little flavor of your writing and your style. And so I had asked you ahead of time if you could prepare an excerpt from the book, and I'll let you set this up, but I think it's a really great excerpt to begin our conversation with because it really describes your style of the beginning of this long journey.
Yeah, so this is right at the beginning of the book, so it doesn't need a whole lot of setup, but it's the moment when I start to think we actually could go to Belgrade. So as a kid, Belgrade was like Oz, like a place that was sort of magical. My dad would talk about there was a king there, it sounds like a fairy tale. And it just seemed like a place we could never get to. It was far away, you need money and time, and I didn't speak Serbian, and there was communism. Balkan Wars. There were all of these things in the way. And so this is really the moment when I realized we could actually fly there. We cruised down the narrow street of Dorchel, Belgrade's Jewish neighborhood, with Google Earth Street View, searching for the house where my father lived before World War II. His family stretched back at least 4 generations in that Serbian city until the Holocaust snapped the links in our chain. My 20-year-old daughter Rebecca sits on a tall chair at the kitchen island of my parents' home, navigating on her laptop. My father sits beside her, leaning in to see the images. I stand behind and look between them. The back of my father's head is gray but not balding, shaved military short by my mother, a contrast to Rebecca's long dark curls. Although my father left the country almost 70 years ago, he is sure of the address. He remembers this two-story row house he lived in with his parents and his uncles at Solinska Olika 8. From the front window, the 3-year-old boy, who would grow up to be our family's patriarch, could see the tops of the helmets of German soldiers patrolling his neighborhood in pairs. I imagine a dark-haired boy standing on tiptoes, lifting a corner of curtain to peer out wide-eyed at the scary sight of armed occupiers goose-stepping past. His mother had forbidden it, so it was a naughty thing to do. Rebecca leads us virtually up and down the street, but we can't find my father's childhood home. Looking at the computer screen, it's as if I'm in Dorchel, a Jewish neighborhood now stripped of its Jews, watching out the window of the Google car. I see pedestrians and parked vehicles that happened to be there in a moment and now dwell there permanently. We spot Hebrew writing on one building and a Star of David on another. We roll by the synagogue and the Jewish community center where my father, grandmother, and aunt lived after the war in a single room in an apartment with 4 other survivors, including a rabbi after the war. Back and forth, but the home my father remembers seems no longer to be there. It almost feels like technology should allow us to scroll, not just across the world, but across time. There should be a button to click for a street view of Dorchel circa 1938.
I love that. Man, I wish
Yeah.
there was that button. That
Yeah,
would,
almost like doesn't the technology
no.
seem like we should have that?
Yeah, and I mean, I just the idea of doing this kind of like family tour over Google Earth is a thing in and of itself. But then, yeah, to think about what that same view would look like as you peel back the decades and the different layers of history would be really, really cool.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, so with that intro, right, with that kind of teasing us into what you could see from afar into your father's hometown and where he grew up, um, for those of us, and I imagine many people in the audience, don't really have an understanding of how the Holocaust transpired in Serbia, and what your particular family story is. Without reading the entire book, I'm wondering if you can give us a kind of a quick snapshot so that we all have a shared history that we can work from for the rest of the evening tonight.
Yeah, I mean, nobody knows this history virtually. That's certainly in America or in North America. So I think people often feel like they should, but we don't learn this in school. So Yugoslavia was a kingdom made after World War One. So as World War Two is starting to happen in Europe, um, Germany and Yugoslavia make a pact, like they're not going to fight. And the Yugoslav people, particularly the Serbs who are living in Belgrade, are so upset by that. They don't want peace with Germany, they want war. So they don't go to work, they go on strike, they get rid of the king, who's really just holding the position for his son, sorry, for his nephew, I think. And then they bring in the real king, who's just a teenager, and he undoes this pact with Germany, and that's what starts the war. And it's a surprise. There's been no declaration of war. Hitler bombs civilian targets in Belgrade because there are no military targets, particularly the Jewish quarter, and anything that people cared about. So the zoo, the National Library, he knows where the bomb shelters are, so he attacks those. And people living in Belgrade had no idea it was coming. So they think it's an air show until they realize it's not. That's my father's earliest memory. He's not quite 3 at that point. He remembers the whistling sounds of the bombs. He remembers running in the street with his mother. They're trying to get to a bomb shelter. And that moment is the beginning of the Holocaust in Yugoslavia. It's the beginning of war and it's the beginning of the Holocaust. And then
And
very
for,
quickly after that, what's that?
for context, Julie, what year is that happening?
Oh, thank you. April 1941. So April 6th. There's
Oh,
3 days of bombing, but it starts April 6th. So very early. So like when I speak in classrooms, kids are often like, why didn't they like get out? Or, like we all have this fantasy, like we can see the future when you look in the past. Why didn't they know it was going to happen? And it's before most of the Holocaust. I mean, most Jews who are going to die are still alive. The final solution has not yet been decided on. In other words, Hitler and his leaders don't really know for sure what they're going to do with the Jews in April 1941. So there's really like no way for them to really understand. I mean, who can understand the Holocaust? But to have realistically to have an understanding of what might be coming. And then very quickly, within a week or 10 days, the German army is boots on the ground in Belgrade, the capital city, which is where my family is. The Jewish men are forced under threat of death to register. We know that my grandfather and my great uncle registered, and then they are given a yellow star and a work assignment. And it's slave labor. My grandfather was digging ditches. But they came home at night. And that was part of the story that my father always told that didn't fit with, the Holocaust that we learned in Hebrew
Yeah.
school. Yeah. So they didn't have
Yeah.
camps up and running yet. It was like too early in the war.
Right. The idea of being sent to a forced labor camp and then coming home to your own bed at night is,
Right.
that's a different kind of narrative.
Yeah. So it always seemed like, was that really the Holocaust? It's not the Holocaust of Germany and Poland. That's what we learned about primarily, and maybe Hungary, right? I mean,
Wow. Okay. And so then as the war progresses, and your grandfather is in this forced labor day job, is it or
yes.
job?
Yeah. Yeah.
Forced
That's what it
each
is.
day go
Right.
and dig ditches.
Yeah. Yeah, so he's working. We know he had a street pass that gave him permission to be on the street during the curfew, by the way, in Serbian, for the Serbs who were collaborating with the Germans. And I looked up the names of the men on the other men on the list, and they're all his neighbors. They're probably people he knew all his life. They're working in the city. The bombing had destroyed the sewers, and now they're being forced to repair it. And that goes on for months. And then in August, around my father's third birthday, my grandfather doesn't come home. And my father remembers my grandmother screaming and crying. Of course, she thinks the worst. She has no way to get information in the moment. She's pregnant with my aunt. But he hadn't been murdered. He'd been held in a camp in the center of the city. So now, 3 months later, they do have a camp. The men can't go home at night, but they're being held not in some distant place, in a place my grandmother can walk to. And that's what the Jewish women in the community have to do. They have to bring their husbands, their fathers, their sons, their brothers, the bare necessities. So there's a letter where the leader of the Jewish community is begging for straw. Please, could the men have straw so they don't have to sleep on the ground? My grandmother was bringing food. I mean, it was very, very primitive conditions, and right in the center of the city. So when we went there in 2017, my father, my adult daughter, and me, I realized, wow, this is why my grandmother was so angry. Like you can just imagine people walking back and forth, living their lives, and here are these men who have done nothing, Jews and Roma, being held in this camp. And in fact, when we were there, and it's terrible conditions, it's not a museum, and people still don't know what it is, and they're walking back and forth. You just can kind of feel what it might have been like.
And from there, I mean, this is still earlier in 1941,
Right.
and your grandfather is little, so he, at that point, I'm assuming, doesn't get to see his dad anymore. Is that right? Or sorry,
Yeah, so
you're,
it's yeah, my father. My father is three. It's my grandfather in the camp. My father actually doesn't remember his father. So he has other memories that, were when his father was still there, but he doesn't remember his father. So I don't know if he was there at the camp. We don't know that part.
hmm, okay. Without giving away too much of the full story of what happens, can you tell us just a little bit about what happens to that camp?
Yes. So there's a couple of months going on. My grandmother and the other Jewish women are bringing food, and I think like catching glimpses of the prisoners, of their family members. One day, my grandmother goes to the camp, and the gates are open, and the camp is empty. And I just, having been there, you can just imagine it's a tiny little place, like what it must have been like. You can see the whole thing from the street. Uh, my grandfather had just disappeared. And my grandmother never knew what happened. We do through the research that I was able to do, but she never knew. But the rumor was that the Jewish men had been moved elsewhere to work for the Reich. And that makes sense. Like my grandfather's in his early 30s. He had been, healthy. It makes sense that they had some need for them somewhere else that made more sense and they moved them. That's not the case. They were probably murdered on the day that she was there, that they had disappeared. But she held out hope that he was going to come back.
Yeah, and I get the feeling that that sense of not knowing um, was difficult to say the least for your grandmother, but also informed a lot of her decisions even after the war, on kind of holding out hope that maybe her husband would come back or maybe he had found a way to survive. And so I
Right.
can imagine that that must have been a really difficult thing to hold on to for the rest of her life, of that uncertainty. And how do you move forward when you don't actually know what happened to the person that you built a family with?
Exactly. She never dated. She didn't remarry. You think of rituals that humans do. We do them for a reason. Often there's a viewing of the body, or being with the body after death across religions. Like that is part of how we come to terms with what has happened. And while it was unusual, there were survivors who showed up even some time later. So I think there was probably enough of that happening that she thought maybe it was possible.
Yeah. So you've mentioned a couple times that about the pieces that were unknown for a long time that you were able to now find some resolution for, through your research, and also this sense that you didn't know about this aspect of the Holocaust in Serbia, and most of us have not learned about this. So when did you start learning about what your father experienced and what happened to your grandfather, and what happened in Belgrade?
Yeah, so my dad was always open with his stories. I know there are lots of survivors who don't tell stories of what happened, but my father shared his stories with my brother and me. But they were memories of a very small child. I mean, he's not even 3 when the war starts. So there are these very short kind of flashbulb memories, and we didn't know how it fit into the broader story. So that's part of it. Like he remembered the bombing, and then I was able to research, oh, this is what happened. They were especially attacking your neighborhood. It was April 6th, 1941. Like we were able to get some details like that. Um, Through the German archives, we got this information. I mean, the Germans kept records, right? Of what happened to my grandfather that gave us a yahrzeit date. And so we never had that before. That was, a meaningful
And one
thing.
of those, yeah, one of those rituals that allows you to grieve in a certain way according to tradition, according to the ritual, that provides some comfort
Right.
for, yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm. Um, and do you have a sense of why this chapter of the Holocaust is something that the rest of us don't know about? And
Yeah.
why?
I mean, yeah, I do.
I'm
I
lucky
have
because
the
I've been
answer.
you. I've been learning over the years more and more, and then getting to read the book. But why is it that this is something that nobody else talks about?
Yeah, I mean, it was always frustrating to me. It always made me feel like maybe my father's stories weren't true, even though they turned out 100% to be true. Or maybe the Holocaust hadn't really come to Belgrade, or it was just very confusing. But the answer is you need people, witnesses, survivors to tell the story. So Auschwitz is liberated by the Allies who take pictures. They have reporters who are journalists who are embedded with them, who are documenting what's happening. There's footage of those very early days, of these horrible conditions and these gaunt prisoners. And what they were seeing, what the soldiers were seeing coming in was like mass killings on a scale that had never happened in this world before. And so, of course, it's very shocking. And it's documented, and people are talking about it. And you have these survivors. So, 1 million Jews were murdered in Auschwitz, but also tens of thousands of mostly young teens and 20s Jewish survivors go on to tell these stories. You need survivors, and now you need descendants to tell the story. So it's kind of a paradox. Timothy Schneider, the historian, calls it the Auschwitz paradox. We know about
Hmm.
Auschwitz because there were so many survivors. We don't know about the places in Eastern Europe where there were few or no survivors. You know, there are villages in Eastern Europe where 100% of the Jews were killed, no witnesses. And so who tells the story?
I'm flipping through my book because there was a line that you wrote about that exact notion that
Yeah,
struck me so hard when I read it about it's almost like if there are no survivors, it's almost as if the people did not exist in the first place.
exactly. There's a term for it. It's called the missing missing. There are a million Holocaust survivors that we don't know their names yet,
Wow.
right? So there's
Wow.
nobody who showed up after the war looking for them because everyone they knew was dead.
Oh, that just tears your heart apart just to think about.
Yeah.
Wow. Um, so something else that came through very clearly as I was reading this and connected to that, wanting to know the things that you didn't have a way to know earlier on in your life. And your book and your writing are filled with stories, with musings, reflections that I think really beautifully convey or paint a picture of you as someone who has a deeply personal longing to find connection with ancestors that you didn't know and that you couldn't know, and with family and culture that you that was stolen from you and from your lineage. And I love the way that in your writing you often kind of imagine out loud what some of your ancestors might have thought in their own time, or how they might have filled their days, what hopes and dreams they might have had. It's such a compelling, I think, a window into your mind and how you are trying to make sense of the loss, and right, like that your family wasn't given the opportunity to pass those ideas and those stories and those hopes and dreams down. And so your imagination is trying to fill in the gaps. And you do it really beautifully. And I'm actually wondering if you'd be willing to read another short excerpt from the book. This one I picked out. It's on page 110. And to me, this was a really powerful example of you trying to place yourself in a direct conversation with your ancestors who you will never have a way to know.
Yeah, this is in a cemetery, and I knew that my family had all been at that cemetery, and so I was really thinking about it. We went on all of our trips to the cemetery, but um, the first time we went in 2017, it was really clear to me that my father was from Belgrade, that we were in his hometown once we got to the cemetery, because nothing roots you to a place like having people in a cemetery, right? I don't have those generations here. But I always kind of wished for it. I'm a New Englander, and they say in Vermont, you are a Vermonter when you have four grandparents in the ground. So I'll never be from anywhere by that definition. But my grandfather is, and my father, and my whole family on that side, they're from Belgrade. So um, I think that's enough. I think about Regina's burial and the people who would have been here. My great grandfather, grandfather, and three great uncles who would have stood by the grave throwing the first handfuls of dirt. They would have expected to be buried here themselves. None are. No one can say with certainty where in Serbia my great grandfather Heinrich, grandfather Alexander, and youngest great uncle Gilles are buried. My two great uncles who survived the war are in cemeteries in California and Israel. With their clothes symbolically torn, did the mourners go home together to sit Shiva, their mirrors covered, and their meals delivered by sympathetic neighbors? I don't know how my great grandmother died, if her death was sudden or expected. I don't know what kind of mother she was, or what kind of grandmother she might have been to my father if she'd lived. I realize that when I want to guess at what her life might have been like, what kind of home she might have made for the boy who would be my grandfather, I rely on my knowledge of Judaism, mostly learned from books. I'm taking what I learned through my fascination with religious life of all flavors, but particularly religious Jewish life, and looking through that lens at my ancestors' lives. While my American life is largely secular, my week has a rhythm marked by a family dinner on Friday night, where we usually light candles and say a blessing. Many of my values, my family values, I associate with our Jewish heritage. Our love for family, our pride in our children, our stress on the importance of learning, our sense of humor, and our focus on food are Jewish to me, though of course not exclusively so. I assume my Jewish ancestors shared these values as well. I absorbed them from my parents, who inherited them from theirs, and on up the line. This is part of why I need to know more. We stand where the mourners stood. I try to picture the scene. I don't know the season. Were they sweating and yearning for a breeze as we are now, huddled against rain or the winter cold? Was there a crowd of mourners, friends, and extended family who were able to gather quickly, as Jewish burial is usually before sunset? I take one of the stones I carried from home out of its plastic bag. It's warm in my hand. I place it on Regina's now uprighted grave. It is a symbol of the permanence of memory. I hand one to Rebecca and one to my father, who do the same.
Thank you, Julie.
Yeah.
I yeah, I mean that excerpt really just jumped out at me, and several points throughout the book, but that one in particular really got me thinking about my own thoughts and feelings about my grandparents and great grandparents and the people that I will never get to know or really know much about in a really powerful way. And you mentioned in that section the need to know more, and that is something that comes through through all of your writing and all of our conversations is that you really have this need. It's not just a desire or a want; it's a need to learn more, to find more, to make those connections. And I'm wondering if you've thought about where that need comes from a little bit, but then also if or how this process of actually filling that void, you've accomplished that. You've learned a lot more about your family through this process and what that has meant to you.
Yeah, I don't know why have always wanted to. I mean, people are different, right? I mean, there are other people in my family who, well, the stories are interesting, but did not write a book, right? So, um, I don't know, but I just always felt it. I've always had a fascination with the past, our past, but other people's past too. I mean, I read like, the Little House on the Prairie books and All of a Kind Family. And like I would take anybody's past. I just think it's so fascinating. I think if we want to know who we are, we need to know who they were, and not everyone thinks that. I don't know.
Yeah. And so, I mean, has your sense of who you are changed as you've learned more about who they were?
Definitely. I mean, a lot of things have been answered. I don't want to give too much away from I hope people will read the book, but I definitely have more of an understanding. And just going to Serbia, where this is going to sound so obvious. In Europe, things are old. Right. So I think we have this like American idea, Kamala Harris said you didn't fall out of a coconut tree. Like I think she was saying that because Americans feel like, oh, there was no world before I was born. I have invented all of it. But in Europe, I don't know, I imagine things are older. Like there's more interest in that feeling of where we come from because they're often still there.
Yeah, that is really interesting. That there's a British comedian that we used to follow, and one of his bits is about coming to the United States and going to a historic district where
Right.
the things were here over 50 years
Right,
ago.
right. My dad was always laughing, especially as you go west.
Yeah.
You're in California and they're like, this is from the 1930s, you know?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Europe, where the history is from.
Right.
It's actually a good segue because I wanted to shift gears a little bit and talk about something else that I learned through this book, which is about the Serbian people themselves and their understanding of what happened during the war and or lack of understanding. And my sense is that you were wrestling quite a bit with modern Serbia and modern Serbs' apparent lack of Holocaust knowledge, or in some cases, their deliberate attempts to obscure or alter their collective memory of the Holocaust. And it seemed to me that a big motivation for you, I don't know if this started this way or it became this way as you visited, was to almost kind of help force Serbia to confront and address its role during the war.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm I guess first, is that an accurate representation? And can you talk to us a little bit about the struggles that you've seen in Serbia about Holocaust memory and accountability?
Yeah. So we don't know the story of what happened in the war. And I think, especially with the Holocaust, that is true in Serbia as well. Um, it's not like it is in Western Europe. Like, so when I started this in 2017, there were no names with victims of the Holocaust anywhere in Serbia. And it took me a while to understand why. And I want to be respectful because the next town from here is Concord, which is the oldest New England inland setting town, 1635. And I was walking there recently, and there's this terrible sign where they celebrate the agreement that the minister made with the Indians, so the Indians would give them the land or sell them or whatever it was. Like, so we all have our own horrible histories that we don't walk around every day thinking about and talking about, but they're also unique. So what happened in Yugoslavia, Yugoslavia was multi-ethnic, multi religions, different cultures bound together in kind of a precarious way, right? So Woodrow Wilson after World War I thinks this would be a good idea if we make this country. And then after World War II, they are focusing on unity. So they're talking about victims of fascism. You see this in other Eastern European countries. We were all victims of fascism. 200 to 300,000 Serbs were killed in the war as a genocide that the Croats perpetrated against them. So it's very complicated. Some of them definitely were victims, not just the Jews, not just the Roma. I mean, there's all different parts of the Holocaust that we don't necessarily learn about. But the idea is we're going to focus on how we all lost. We're not going to talk about particular ethnicities. We're not going to talk about religions. We're going to have no religion because it's communism. And that's what they do. And then after communism, with the Balkan Wars and the coming down of the Berlin Wall and all that, they become anti-communist, right? And so they are less anti-fascist, and they actually take down like a lot of the partisan monuments. We wanted to see one that was in Belgrade where two of my father's uncles were on this monument because they fought as Jewish partisans. But the monument is gone because they're not talking about that anymore. So it's very
Wait,
complicated.
that was a monument to Jewish partisans from World War II?
It was just a monument to partisans from World War II, and
Um,
some of them were Jewish, right? So
wow.
they took down it's not about Jewish partisans. They just didn't want to talk about the partisans anymore because that partisans were communist, and now we're not talking about the communists in a positive way.
Wow.
So it's complicated stuff, I think, for what Americans know about history. It's complicated, but
Yeah.
interesting.
Did you have, in your travels there, did you have conversations with contemporary Serbs about, what they learned, what they know, how they talk about the war now?
Yeah, because it's still in living memory, and even if it's not in living memory, I mean, there's plenty of people who are our age who heard, from their grandparents about what happened. So people know about the war in general, and there was horrible civilian loss in the war that wasn't genocide, but just civilians being killed as well. But they don't necessarily know about the Holocaust.
Hmm. And it seemed like you're trying to change that a little bit.
Yeah, it's not like I
Yeah.
single-handedly showed up. I mean, there's a
Yeah.
great now we will all know this, boys and girls. There's a great NGO on the ground in Serbia called Haver Serbia, who do education about Judaism in general, about the Holocaust, so there is work that's being done. There are other organizations, but there is resistance from the government. So I think what you're getting at is these stones, these stumbling stones that we were able to get installed. So
I
there's a
would love
project,
to, yeah.
yeah, there's a project called a Stolpersteine project. Stolpersteine, apologies to German speakers,
I was going to
something.
say I wanted to make sure that you were the first person to say that word so that I didn't have to
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's somebody
your
who's like
pronunciation.
tearing out their
But
hair right now.
you,
So
I
I'm
first learned
sorry.
about this. I first learned about this project through you as you were going through trying to get these stones placed at the last known residence of your ancestors. And I learned that this is something that happens throughout Europe or has happened throughout Europe, where there are these stones that are placed purposefully to be a little bit of a stumbling block to people going about their day as a reminder, a very visceral reminder of that there were Jewish people who lived here who were murdered because of who they are. And
Exactly.
that was very powerful. So yeah, tell us about what that was like for you.
So I had seen them in Western Europe, and they're just what you say. They're like a little bit in your face. You're just kind of walking somewhere or doing your day, and you're reminded. And you actually, the stones are like small. They would fit in your palm of your hand, but there's the person's name, their birth date, the death date, and what happened. Just like deported to Auschwitz or whatever. I mean, it's very broad, but it's enough to know, and you can see families together, and you get the idea. Um, when we went to where my father lived in Dorchel in the Jewish neighborhood, that's not a Jewish neighborhood now, it wasn't that there were no signs. There is a synagogue there. There was some Hebrew writing on some buildings. If you know, you know. But the feeling I had was that most people don't know. It's not Jewish people living there. It's actually kind of in the center of the city, so it's kind of it's like a posh place to live, and there are bars and restaurants and people are walking around, and I just really wanted um, that reminder that hey, these people lived here too, and you live here now, but there's a history to this place. And of course, my grandfather, like 6 million other victims, doesn't have a marked grave, so I wanted him to have something. And those stones were not yet in Serbia at all, and so I wanted them. In my American optimism, like, let's just get those in there. Like, maybe no one's thought of this before. And later, people who really know, who studied this, who understand, were like, yeah, we never thought you could do that. It seemed impossible. But I didn't, no one told me that to my face. So I just kind of kept going with help, of
I mean,
course.
that sometimes is the blessing of American,
Yeah.
like, we can do
Yeah.
anything, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Let's
not
put a
knowing
flag
how
on the
difficult it's
moon.
going to be, yeah, allowed you to move forward.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And so now there are how many in Belgrade for your family
There
members?
are 10. So three are for my family. There are seven other stones as well to victims. We're currently working to get survivor stones. That's really how the project is designed to reunite symbolically victims and survivors. We have not been able to get that yet, but Haver Serbia, which is the organization on the ground, is gonna try. We're gonna try. So
Great.
that's the hope.
Yeah, that's really great. It's been inspiring to see how that has come to how you've made it come to fruition over the last several years, and a little bit of American willpower, a little bit of Julie's chutzpah, and a little bit of help from people on the ground there, um,
Exactly.
to make something really significant for your family and for the community at large.
Yeah, I feel like it's really important. And now Serbia is part of this greater thing. So it's the largest decentralized monument in the world. There are tens of thousands of these stones.
Wow,
Yeah.
wow, that's really cool. Um, okay, so we have a little bit of time left still. I want to encourage people, if you have questions of your own, to put them in the chat or in the Q&A, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. I'd love to talk for a minute though, Julie, about your involvement with 3GNY, because
Yeah,
that's
let's
how we
talk
got
about
to know
that.
each other. Yeah. I know that you enrolled in and completed our speaker training class in 2021, which was soon after I did. You were one of the first classes that I got to work with from the other side as supporting the class. And you've been a very active volunteer since then. I've gotten to sit in on some of your presentations. I've seen how students and teachers respond to your storytelling. giving them a little snippet of what's in the book, but in a way that's very compelling for middle and high school students. Um, and I have realized since then that you were already well into this process of researching and learning your family story and all the details when you took the WEDU class. And so I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how or if the WEDU class and working with 3GNY and with Living Links and other 3Gs to build their own stories, um, if that has informed your understanding of your family story and the book project as well.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, Hidden in Plain Sight wouldn't be this book. It would be a book, I think, but it wouldn't be this book without everything I learned about storytelling. So I had done the research. I was a writer, I was writing, but I wasn't an oral storyteller. And so, so many of those skills come from what I learned. I mean, the first time when I took the class, but I co-facilitate. So I've seen a lot of classes. I learned something every time of how to tell a story that's been really important. How to put things together, how to string people along, keep their attention. All of that comes from 3GNY. And just as a co-facilitator, hearing so many stories, that also
Yeah.
teaches you what works and what doesn't, and just the diversity of what happened in the Holocaust. I remember the first night it was Peter Nelson, who's fabulous. And he said, like, sort of right off the bat, like, good evening, hello. And also, like, most people didn't survive the Holocaust. If your grandparents survived the Holocaust, they're the exception, not the norm. And they didn't do it. This was the part that really struck me. They didn't survive because please don't say they survived because they were strong, smart, clever, brave. Like lots of people who were strong, smart, clever, brave died on the first day. And it was such a, first of all, that's true. So it just echoed in the way that truth does. But it was such a relief. Like, oh, we're gonna like this is how we're gonna do it. And just like after that, I just like was gonna like listen to anything that Peter said. I mean, he just really changed how I thought about a lot of things. But also our conversations. I mean, we talked before I presented the first time. I had so much trauma from the way I learned about the Holocaust, too fast and too raw and too young, in middle school. I mean, I was like worried about traumatizing kids, and you were very helpful. I don't know if you even remember that. And then
I
after,
don't know.
yeah, we had this great conversation. You were like, it's okay, they can handle it. And then we had another conversation afterwards because the first time I spoke for 3GNY, I made the teacher cry. And I was just like, what am I doing? And you were like, it's okay. Sometimes that happens. So yeah, I mean, so many things I've learned along the way, just in terms of what Holocaust education is and isn't, and why we do this, and what we're hoping for from the kids that are listening.
Oh, that's great. I love hearing that. And I second what you're saying about, hearing so many stories. And I know many people who volunteer as facilitators for the speaker training, or who are volunteers and come to our We Do Wednesday programs and, listen to multiple versions of people telling not a survivor story themselves, but their family stories and how we adapt that. Um, I've learned a lot about storytelling just from all of the different participants and volunteers and from you. And for those of you in the audience who know Peter Nelson, certainly from Peter, that mantra that, the smartest and bravest and most resilient people were shot on the first day. I hear Peter's voice in my head as I'm
Yeah.
working with other speakers as well. Um, and something that he talks about a lot that you do really well in your oral presentations as well as in the book is really giving us a window into like the specifics about your father, your grandfather, and your grandmother, and helping us see them as whole people, right? Like never losing sight of them and how they may have seen or experienced the world during that time. Um, so it's very noticeable,
It was
I think.
really important to me. There's a lot that I don't know still. So just to be like, this is what we know, this could be, but not to mislead the reader into thinking we know this.
Yeah.
You know, th- they were, and my father's is still, of course, like complete people. It's not just what happened to them in the Holocaust, right? I mean, that's just one facet of this life that they had.
Absolutely. Yeah. We have a question in the Q&A about the title of the book. Can you explain a little bit about what that title means or where it came from?
Yeah, definitely. I'm gonna just hold up the book. Can you all see that? So Hidden in Plain Sight comes from this picture. This is my father and my aunt, his younger sister, standing on the street in occupied Belgrade, Yugoslavia, in the spring of 1943. So something to know is that in the spring of 1942, Belgrade, there's some discussion, was either the first or the second city in Europe to be declared Judenfrei, free of Jews. And here are these Jewish children a year later standing on the street, hidden and not hidden. So that's the title. And my first thought, since then, there have been many interpretations, which is really interesting. I mean, the whole history was hidden from me, but also in plain sight. Um, this is a picture that I stared at as a kid. We had four pictures that came out of the war and the pre-war, and this was one of them. And I would just marvel at how they could be there. And now I understand it was illegal for a civilian to have a camera in occupied Europe. It's not like now we're all walking around with our cell phones taking pictures of our lunch, right? People were not allowed to have cameras, and if they did, they were not shooting on the street because the Germans were concerned about military movement and military secrets. So somehow my grandmother got this picture, and I think she got it because she wanted to show her husband, these kids' father, my grandfather, this picture of this moment in their childhood that he had missed.
And that picture is from right in the middle of the war, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, thank you for explaining that. We have a comment from Carol, another wonderful volunteer in in 3GNY's program, who also has some connection to the Holocaust in Serbia,
Oh, great.
and has read some pretty harrowing accounts of things that your grandfather's fellow citizens might have experienced. And so Carol was wondering how it felt for you to be in Belgrade and if you've been back since your initial research trip.
Yeah, so I've been three times, 2017, 2018, and again in 2022 when the Stolpersteine were laid in the ground. I hope to go back again. I felt all the feelings when I was there. I mean, the Serbs are so welcoming. I mean, it was like a homecoming. My dad's birthplace is Belgrade. It says it in his passport. We show up at the airport coming in and they welcome him. So there was a lot of things that were really wonderful. Across the street from our hotel was a Pelichinki stand. A Pelichinki is a crepe, but not exactly, and it's Serbian, and we ate those on the weekends when I was a kid. We still do. My mother makes them. So like, oh, this is where they come from. This is where we come from. It was very heartening to me. But the hotel that we stayed in was the headquarters of the Gestapo. You know what I mean? So like everywhere you go, it's also this past that's very horrible and in your face if you know what you're looking at. We went to the Central Park, which is lovely. People, walk dogs and have picnics, and that's where my grandfather was registered by the Nazis. We went to the camps, two of them that are in Belgrade, and they're not museums, they're not anything, they're not mowed, they're not maintained, there are stray dogs, so that part is very, very hard. And I was there with my father, who remembered all kinds of things from, during the war, but after the war. And his memories were coming up as we went to places, and happy memories too, all kinds of memories. So that was the zoo. They used to go to the zoo. So it was all the emotions, really.
Sounds like it, and especially with multiple trips like that,
Yeah.
and you being in a different place in your research each time that you go, and in your understanding of the story and where you fit into all of that.
Yeah, I mean, going back to a place that you've been to before is very different than going the first time, like,
Sure,
yeah.
sure. And we have another question from Melky that is a little bit connected, but are or were you in contact with any other survivors or descendants of survivors from Belgrade? And do you know if other Jews in Belgrade had similar experiences to your grandfather and grandmother?
Yes. So we hired a Jewish guide when we were in Belgrade the first time, and our stories made total sense to him because it's other people's stories too. And that was very affirming. We met Jews who are still living in Belgrade who have similar stories in their past. And then through the writing that I've done, people have reached out to me. So reach out to me through my website, juliebrill.com, if you if you're my cousin, because I feel like we all these, there aren't that many of us, but we're cousins. Not just, that's not like hyperbole. We like literally are probably related because there was so much intermarriage. And we're like filling in each other's stories a little bit. So that's been one of the wonderful parts.
That's great. And a perfect way to add the shameless plug that I will put in the chat for everybody, because you all, if you don't have it yet, you should go to Julie's website and learn more about this project and order a copy of the book. It's available in bookstores too, right, Julie? So people
Yes,
might
yeah, and
go
if your
into
bookstore
a local
doesn't have it,
bookstore.
they can order it. Yeah, or Bookshop, which is the independent bookstore online. Yeah.
Yes. And it's a strange to call it a delightful read because it is not a delightful story, but it's easy to read. And as I said earlier, reading your journey, both the physical journey and the emotional journey, I think for many of us in the descendant community, I know for me personally, took me on my own journey of reflection and discovery and wondering. And um, that's a really important process. So thank you for sharing the book and sharing your story with us.
Yeah, we all have those similarities, I think, in different ways, but that same like yearning, right? Yeah.
There is a lot in common for sure.
Yeah. I wish that I could see everybody. It's nice to be here in the descendant community.
Yes.
I think I said at the beginning, I feel like I'm at home. Of course I would love for you all to get the book, but if you're able to ask your library to get a copy, if you're able to leave an Amazon review, this book is really a labor of love. So I'm just really trying to get it out into the world. The more people who know these stories, the better.
Thank you so much, Julie. Thanks for writing and sharing the story with all of us, and thanks for being here tonight with me and with 3GNY to talk about it and fill us in and kind of give us whet our appetite for reading more of the stories and learning more of the history from Serbia and the importance of learning and capturing all of our stories.
Yeah, thank
Uh,
you so much, Dave. I learned tonight 500 volunteers, trained volunteers. That's amazing. Go
and I think
3GNY.
that number is higher now because the speaker training program is still going strong. So if there are folks out there who are interested in learning how to tell your own family story, please reach out to us as well. And with that, we're just so grateful to have you involved with 3GNY for all that you do to support Holocaust memory and education. And to everyone out there who joined us tonight, thank you. We're glad that you took the time to hear Julie share this story that must never be forgotten. There's a link in the chat for how to find more about Julie and to order her book. And a reminder that if you have not yet made a gift to support our educational programs, we hope you'll consider making one now. If you look in the chat, I will also place a link where you can do just that, as well as share some feedback about tonight's program. We will send out an email in the coming days with more information, with a link to the recording from this conversation. If you'd like to share it with others, please do so. And remember that you can always check out our past programs on 3GNY's YouTube channel. So thank you again for taking the time out of your evening to be with us. We're grateful as always for your presence and support. And Julie, thank you for sharing with us tonight.
Thank you so much, Dave.
Have a good evening, everybody.